Hi, everybody, and welcome to the fourth in our series in conversation with Foster Wiki. I'm Sarah Anderson, the founder of Foster Wiki, and I'm absolutely delighted to have today Sandra Scoular, who is a fostering social worker. And what a wonderful opportunity for us to get this kind of, perspective from somebody who's, well, as you'll see from her biography in a minute, has really experienced fostering, supervising social worker. So I've been talking to Sandra, and I think many of you probably have as well, for years and years through my Facebook pages. She's been made a regular appearance in the comments, and we've had lots and lots of lively discussions. And I have to say, she really is a champion of not just fostering, but foster carers. And we're very grateful for that, because I don't think that's always the case, and it's very exciting to have her here today. Now, I hugely value her contribution and what she stands for. I've got my notes as usual, so I don't go miles off track. And she's going to talk to us today about a variety of things, and one of them will be her contribution to the fostering world and how we feel sometimes at loggerheads with social workers and the relationships that we have with them these days. And we're going to look back over the years from when Sandra first started social work, and when there was much more a climate of relational work with foster carers. And I think you'll find as well, because I've obviously chatted to Sandra before, there was much more relational work that went on actually with social workers and their managers and their teams. So we're going to see how we feel things have got lost along the way, and what maybe the solutions are to help that, forge that, to come back again. Where can we rekindle that, and how can we reverse that situation? We'll have a chat about that. Another thing we're going to speak about, maybe if we get round to it, there's always so much to talk about in 40 minutes, is very often we feel, and I think Sandra sort of echoed it a little bit as well, how often we sit in meetings with other professionals, I'm going to say, although I don't think we're always considered as part of that professional team, and how few of the professionals in those teams really know about foster carers and foster care and what's really going on at that kind of base level. So before we go any further, let me introduce you to Sandra. Sandra Scoular, although many of you may know her as Sandra Folin, if you're fostering in the northeast of England, she's very well known up there. She began her life as a social worker back in the early 90s. Her background's in nursing, then psychiatry. Sandra says it was working in psychiatry that led her into social work, as many people suffering from mental illness is due to social situations. In 1989, she undertook the CQSW, which at the time was the Certificate in Social Work. She felt, in contrast to her nursing qualification, this was more directed to educationally to psychology, sociology, and politics. In those days, there were 3 long practice placements, and Sandra qualified as a social worker in 1991. On her first day of practice, she was given 18 child protection cases, some of which were children in foster care. She says, in all honesty, she didn't have a clue. However, she says in those days, social workers were what she calls spoon-fed in their roles. This really helped them to practice within a very safe, experienced management structure. And we were wondering between us if that still is the case. Sandra then went on to practice as a children and families social worker for 12 plus years. This was in frontline child protection, court work, children in foster care, and adoption. She says in 2002, she landed her dream job of supervising social worker for foster carers. I wonder how many social workers would describe it as such, landing their dream job. But it's really lovely. She did that role until 2014 and has since worked as an independent fostering social worker. So I think we can safely say Sandra is way more qualified to speak to us about fostering supervision and about being a fostering supervisor. So I'm going to start by saying, welcome, Sandra. Lovely to have you. Thanks for being here today and coming on our channel. I just want to say I was amazed by one statistic when we spoke that you gave me when you'd embarked on your social care career in 1991, that you had had to be over 30 years old to apply, and that you were one of 2,000 applications for 50 places. I mean, golly, how things have changed. Can you tell us a bit more about those early years and kind of the difference as you got more into social work, the differences that you found and why?
Yeah. As I say, I was a nurse, and I had two friends who in those days, there was two ways to do your CQSW because we were all single parents. So those two friends, they were doing a 3-year course part-time, and then there was the 2-year course for the CQSW. When I approached my managers in nursing, they shook their heads because in those days, social work was such a highly prized profession that they thought I was overstating my abilities.
Oh.
They did write me an excellent reference, and when to get on the interview, you actually had to write an essay about your life experience. And the interview for social work was a full day long, which, you know, they questioned you on this essay you had written. You had to do group work with certain situation you were given. It was very, very strict. And talking to a lot of people who were there, who had been shortlisted, many of them had tried for 2 and 3 years running to access the course.
Wow, gosh.
So it was a highly, highly prized course.
Yeah.
And academically, I didn't have a lot of academic qualifications, but I had to recognise nursing qualifications. And that got me onto the CQSW. Now, our first week in social work was at a place called St Chad's in County Durham. And it was residential for 5 days. When I found out what I had to do in those 2 years, it came as a big shock. Academically, I was thinking, I can't do this.
Not going to manage that.
Not going to manage this. However, you know, I met other people who were going to be on my course, and they were all feeling pretty much the same. And so we embarked on this CQSW course. And as I say, it was more educational. And I think nothing's changed about that. I think, you know, when social workers are, whether they're doing their DIPSWA or, you know, people who've done the CQSW, it was very much about education. You were educated in politics, psychology, sociology. It was a very, very interesting course. And then in your second year, they asked you to specialise. And my specialism was children and families. So my placements reflected that. In the first year placement, I was, it was a very interesting placement. I was placed with victim support in Newcastle. And as part of that, I got to do shifts with the police. In the Panda car as a second worker. That was a bit of an eye-opener. But also I was placed with a diversity officer. Now, if you're going back to 1991, that was pretty new in those days.
Yeah, of course.
And I met the Jewish community, I met the Muslim community, and I met the Sikh community, and learned such a lot about the different diverse people that are living in Newcastle. My next 2 placements, one was with the NSPCC in Newcastle, and the other one was with the Children and Families team in South Shields. Yes, I learned a little bit about what was expected of me, but as you see, I walked into, there was Sunderland Social Services on my first day, 18 child protection cases waiting for me in the cupboard. Shock horror. I hadn't a clue, not a clue. And at the time, I had a very good manager, and the first thing he said to me, and I've never forgotten it, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen.
Right.
And I have never forgotten that, and I reinforce it time and time again to foster carers.
Yes, yeah, and that's one of the things at Foster Wiki, we're just
Huge.
put it down, write it down,
Yes,
record,
write
record,
it down,
record.
record.
Mm,
It has got me out of so many sticky situations
mm.
because I never forgot that. Now, the other thing about in those days, I went into a very settled child and family team. We only did child protection and looked after children. We did not, in that particular team or in those days in Sunderland, do any Section 17 children in need work. So what I found with my manager, for the first year, I had supervision once a week, uninterrupted, for 4 hours at a time.
Wow.
And in those days,
that still go on now, or
I don't think so.
no?
What it entailed as well, we had a procedure manual. So if I was given a task to do, say writing a Form E for a child, that's the first one I can remember.
Mm.
And my manager would say to me, right, Sandra, go away and do A, B and C, and then come back. If it was a child protection where I had to go out and knock on a door, I would always have a more experienced worker with me.
Yeah.
If I went to a child protection review or a looked after review, my manager would be with me. Same with a child protection conference. If I was in court, my manager would be sat there.
Yeah.
And I can remember, I can remember once saying to the manager, when I got a bit more, a bit more confident. And I said to him, yeah, but what if you're wrong? And he said to me, will I make it easy for you, Sandra? And I said, yeah. He said, just go and do as you're told. I'm not a one for doing as I'm told. And he said, if I'm wrong, I'm stood in front of you. And he said, if I'm wrong, the area controller is stood in front of me.
Yeah. So in other words, you've got backup. You're being, I've got your back, sort of thing.
Yeah, that is the biggest change, I would say.
Yeah.
That I've seen.
Such a blame culture these days, isn't it?
It wasn't in those days. And the team, you would have a senior social worker who'd maybe been with the team 8 years. You would have somebody who'd been there 6 years, somebody who'd been there 5 years. And we also had what you called a couple of welfare assistants. There was one in each team. And the welfare assistants would work with us. Now, what surprised me about social work, and looking back, in nursing, we had quite a lot of resources.
Yeah.
But when I went into social work, Sarah, I couldn't believe the amount of resources that there was.
Oh, so there was actually more.
It was amazing. You know, you had the money, you had the people, you had the support.
Yeah.
And also what we had a pen and paper and a paper file. There was no computers, there was no ticky boxes. And a lot of time we spent with families. Now, if you look at the Form F assessment, the Form F assessment is a very, very detailed assessment process. We did a very, very similar one called the Orange Book on families in the community, and that was the basis of your case. Yes, you could add to it, but you had spent a lot of time with those families, and in those days, a lot of practical time.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have more opportunity to actually, have relations with them. And I mean, we talk about these days, there's all this word relational, as social workers have to be taught to be relational, which is alarming, really, because I would have thought social work should all be based on relationships, but perhaps that got lost along the way somewhere.
So what would happen is we would put the welfare assistant in for a few weeks, and she lived on the patch, right? She didn't have a car and she didn't have anything. They knew her as the woman who worked for the social services. and they could be standing next to her in the fish shop on a Saturday night.
Right, real community thing.
Yeah. So she could go at 7 o'clock in the morning and shout through the letterbox for the parent to get herself out of bed, because we've got children to get to school here.
Yeah.
Then she could say, you know, do you know, can I have a look in your cupboards and see what you've got? When do you get paid? So she would help them with budgeting.
Right.
Then she would say, do you know how to make a dinner? No, you haven't got a clue. Right, we're going down to Jackie White's Market and getting a half a pound of mince. And I'm going to show you how to make a dinner.
Gosh, that's so, wow, that's so different, isn't it?
So different.
You know, I can't even imagine that anyone being able to do that these days, but
so
what a wonderful way to, the care review, in actual fact, at the moment, Josh McAllister's care review, I know there's a lot of focus on this, you know, helping families stay together, and it seems that we had that model at some point.
Yeah, we did.
What changed it all, do you think?
I found, I mean, it was, as I say, practical work. I mean, you know, we used to clean people's houses, we used to get them grants, we used to do supervised spending of the grant, and we were all so involved in our families, and there was a team spirit. If somebody had to work late one night, one of us would offer to work with them. You had that camaraderie.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, I worked in County Durham for what, 7, 8 years. Then I came to South Tyneside and I did a couple of years in child and family psychiatry, where I did family therapy. And then a little bit of time in their children and family team. Then I moved to North Tyneside. Now that would have been 1999. And that's when I would pinpoint things were beginning to change. Now, when I went to North Tyneside in 99 and South Tyneside, the caseloads were huge. And I'm talking, you had 50 families.
Wow.
I'd be 6 kids in those 50 families.
How did you manage?
Working till 10, 11 o'clock at night, Sarah. So when I went to North Tyneside, I said to the manager, how many cases? And she said to me, 13. I said, 13 families? She said, no, Sandra, children. So there might have been 3 children in a family.
Right.
And we had in that team, again, it was a very stable team. In those days, there was no such thing as agency workers. Everybody had a proper job in the team. And we had the legal team situated in our building. So it was very much, we worked hand in glove with the legal team, still doing a lot of hands-on work with families. But then
were there more local buildings then?
Yeah, local buildings, yeah.
Yeah, so they're not so many now.
They were like patch buildings.
Right.
You know, your building would cover a certain patch. So then what happened, it got really bad. They did a review of the managers and they used psychometric testing. And the managers in those days were quite caring of their staff.
Right, yeah.
And they were all found wanting. And basically, you know, they brought in a total different management structure, which was very authoritarian.
Right.
And it was at that point, my manager from Sunderland had started a looked after team in County Durham. And I got in touch with him and he said, oh, Sandra, you know, come and work for me. And I went actually for the manager, not the work. That was very heavy going in the looked after team, because it started off with such a very good philosophy that we were going to be able to spend at least an hour a week with the looked after children. You know, we were going to be able to take them on outings. We were going to do all sorts. And we had a great big pot of money that was called Invest to Save. And I remember one young person, he wanted a drum kit. And my manager just got out a checkbook and wrote a check for £2,000.
Oh, wow.
For buying the drum kit. Yeah. Sadly, it didn't work. And it didn't work because there was more children coming into the system and no outlet for them. So the caseloads just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
So in terms of what, where to put them, or in terms of not enough, more children or social workers?
Yeah. More social, and of course there was no more social workers.
No.
So the caseloads were pretty high. And then, as I say, I applied to a private independent fostering agency. And my manager applied at the same time. And I always remember, we went along for an introduction day. And this particular independent fostering agency said, right, can we just say, anybody who doesn't like foster carers needs to leave now. Right. Because they are our bread and butter. This is their building. Yeah. This is where it all happens. So if you don't like foster carers, off you go.
Yeah. Out of interest, did anyone walk out? Because it's interesting that they even actually identified the fact that some social workers don't like foster carers, which is
and we see awful, my lovely brilliant manager. I gave him a little nudge and I said bye. Anyway, it turned out I was offered the job and my manager wasn't. He messed up in his interview. But then when I went to talk to the person whose job I was taking, and I had an issue with this, and looking back, it was a stupid issue. What he told me was I would be on call for 7 nights every, say, 4 to 6 weeks with a private agency. And I didn't want that. And I didn't see the point of it.
Yeah. So
then what I did, I took a job with the local authority, where I was for since 2002 to 4, so another 12 years. Again, it was like I'd been a qualified social worker for 12 years, but going into a fostering team, it was totally alien. I felt like a brand new social worker.
What difference?
Hidden work.
Wow.
Where social workers think that fostering officers have a very easy time. You know, they come in, they have a cup of tea, they have a biscuit, you know, they stay for half an hour and off they go. And in the early days, yes, it was a little bit like that back in the early 90s.
Just then you'd travel around and see your foster carers. Yeah.
So anyway, I was spoon-fed that, and I was given my first assessment of a foster carer, and it was a lovely couple. And I was very anxious about doing this assessment because I had done many child and family assessments, but not with foster carers. Anyway, what happened was when I had completed this assessment, the service manager came to me and said, could we use this as an example? Because she was very impressed with the standard of it. And in those days, if you had completed the assessment process, you then became the supervising social worker.
Right. See, that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
So you knew that family, and you knew their vulnerabilities, and you knew their strengths. And you built up through the assessment process a level of trust. Now, also what was started to do, that was probably the very start in County Durham, because it used to have 2 fostering teams. It's a huge county, Durham. One at the north end of the county and one at the south. And about 2005, when they started this team that I had joined, they were actually knocking on foster carers' doors saying, you know, have you got any children in placement? There was no records.
Right, of course, no computers and not everything no joined up work.
No joined up work, no. So I was in right from the very beginning of change. Now, I love change because I think it motivates people. And I was always one of these people that could actually motivate people with change. And then we got into supervision records and making things formal. And again, we had a very strict process for supervision. And there was a work group of us. We put together a supervision record, and then we piloted for 6 months. But once a month, all the carers would be asked in to a meeting with the head of service, and they would be able to give their views on, you know, what had worked, what hadn't worked.
Yeah.
And then we would have a change round with the record, and, you know, we listened to foster carers.
Yeah.
We listened to them. And the manager I had was a lady called Sandra Scoular. Florence had been in fostering for many, many, many years. And, you know, if there was an issue with a carer, if there was a concern, or, you know, there was a complaint made, Florence could always see the foster carer side of things.
Yeah.
And I think that was really helpful, you know. And for me, I mean, I had a great I loved foster carers, because going back to when I worked in the front line, to me, they were the professionals. They were the people that looked after these children 24/7. We would pop in for an hour or two, see them at a meeting. These people knew these children better than anybody.
It's very refreshing to hear, because, of course, that's not how it feels to us these days. It really does not feel like that. I mean, that takes us into that other question of that palpable them and us relationship.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot at all, but, you know, what's the chatter behind the scenes these days about foster carers? Because I just feel sometimes that there are a lot of social workers who maybe they don't really know what they do, or they don't, you know, they see the respect part of it seems to be really sort of disappearing. It's more tick boxing, less relationships. Foster carers are feeling really let down by the quality of course, your position is key to us.
Yeah.
You know, fostering supervisor is key to the placement. It's key to the children, isn't it? It's not just us. And you know, the amount of strain it is on a foster carer's mental health, for instance. Absolutely. You know, that person to speak to. But these days, carers don't feel that they have enough trust to speak. Can you speak a little bit about that relationship and why others, you know, you're a rare social worker that will speak up and say these things, but frankly, there are a lot of social workers that we don't feel are on side, or, you know, carers are getting more and more afraid to even speak about anything.
In my first year, holding my hands up here, I once said to a fostering officer, I was very, very critical of foster carers, right? And she said to me, Sandra, these are just ordinary people in ordinary families trying to do an amazing job. And that was the light bulb moment for me. After that, I had a lot of respect for foster carers. I always worked on the premise that even as a social worker, anything I knew about that child, that foster carer needed to know as well. And
that doesn't happen as well, yeah.
And actually, you know, it was, I'm not too sure which standard it was in, but it is stated that foster carers need the same information as the area team hold on the child. And that was my sort of starting premise.
Yeah.
And I think the difference now, I mean, I used to work, if I can use an example, I had a child in foster care when I was a social worker. And this young person was having a kick-off one night, and all of the bedroom furniture that she could lift went out of the bedroom window. And the next day, I'd been there till 10 o'clock. And in those days, it was really good, because if you were working late, then you could ring your manager when you got home to have a debrief.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
And he said to me the next morning, why on earth were you there till 10 o'clock? where was the fostering officer? And I said, she was with me, why? And he just shut up. And to me, he used to say, you know, you're there for the child. Now, this is where I think the problem is. You're there for the child, the fostering officer's there for the carers. Well, no. If you're not both working together to support the child in that placement,
yeah, absolutely,
and it breaks down, who's going to pay the price?
Yeah,
the child.
Yeah, and so often you hear the only thing we ever get asked about is, have you got enough support? Are you being trained? You know, and people continue to say, I mean, they said it again in Parliament a couple of weeks ago, you know, we really value foster care. It's foster care fortnight, really value foster care, and we know we've got to give them more support. But that's not the support you're talking about. Their idea of support is we go off and have a cup of tea and play bingo somewhere, or you know, we get another fostering mentor or something like that, or we have Mockingbird or something like that. That the support you're talking about is the crucial support that we need. That we all work as a team. Each part of that team works in synergy with each other, and that the foster care and the child are at the centre as the total placement. They're not separate entities. They are the placement.
Absolutely.
And if you don't support that placement with the things they need, psychological support, you need, you know, the child needs to go to camps, the foster carer could do with mental health support as well. Mind you, they daren't mention that, but you know, we need more support around in the professionals working in the team educationally, in the, you know, maybe child exploitation teams, police, everybody in that team. That's what, to me, support looks like. Not a cup of tea. It looks like, just as you've explained there, everybody working as a team together to support the placement.
Absolutely. And I think the relationship, I find now a lot of social workers, to me, are too young. I would like to see and if I can just make a differential, I left nursing in 1989 on £8,500 a year. That was my salary.
Yeah.
And I went to university. Okay, I didn't pay for university in those days, and I think I got a £60 a week grant off the council. 2 years later, I started social work on 18,000 a year. That was the difference.
Yeah.
Recognizing life experience, the responsibility of a social work post. And now we've fallen way behind. I would
Why
say
do you think that is?
I don't know. I really don't know. It changed for me, Sarah, around about 97, 98. And what happened with that, everything started to be computerized. So when you were doing family assessments, it was no longer the orange book. It was these, I don't know if you remember, there was 2 figures plucked out the air. When you became involved with a family, your first assessment had to be done within 7 working days. Now, for a social worker, in practice, that actually means an hour's visit. And then a full assessment would be done in, was it 21 days or 28 days? But it was admitted that the government said the figures had been plucked out the air. So you didn't have an understanding of that family in any way, shape or form before you were into the court process. And, you know, whereas in my day, you had 12 weeks to work with that family and get an assessment done. So it could be a thorough assessment. So what happened was, where we were using the guidelines as a tool, they were then put on a computer and there was a ticking box and a couple of lines. And to me, you know, social work started to turn into computer-based rather than relationship with family-based. It didn't happen while I was practicing in foster care, and that's what I liked about foster care. I could still do thorough assessments, I could still get to know my families, and I could still work with my families, and I was always there for my families. Now, one of the things I didn't do, because I'm a little bit naughty, I wouldn't have the works phone. I wouldn't have a works phone, and my carers had my phone 24/7.
Wow.
Because going back to the IFA and placement I was offered, and then knew that my foster carers, they never took advantage of it, Sarah.
No.
If they needed me at 10 o'clock at night, they needed to speak to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember an email went round this day, and it was in connection with a carer who'd been having a bit of an issue with a 15-year-old. She was a single carer. And the young person had been caught shoplifting, and I'd said to her, look, ring me when this young person's back home. I think the person she was with, their dad was doing the interview, the police interview. And anyway, she rang me, it was about 9 o'clock, and apparently this young person, she'd had a right kick off, because when she'd come through the door, my carer had said, right, give me that phone, I'm confiscating that phone. Well, she got the volcano effect.
Yeah.
And the placement was on the verge of breakdown. And she says, I've rang the emergency duty team, and she said they won't come out. So I rang them, and I said, this carer's a single carer. She's on her own. This girl's a big girl. She can be quite volatile. No, they couldn't go out. And I said to them, okay, then fair enough, I'll go out. You go out? I said, yeah, my carer needs some support tonight. I'll go out.
Yeah.
Now, if I hadn't have gone out, that placement would have disrupted. My carer held her hands up, all after all wrong, Sandra. And I said, we'll settle the young person down. And when I went back the next day, they were all cuddled up on the sofa.
Oh, see, what a difference. And also, but so, even I wouldn't say to my supervising social worker, although I have a good relationship, I wouldn't say, oh, I've done it all wrong, it's all gone wrong. You're far too vulnerable as a foster carer these days to admit that things, everyone's then writing everything down and it's in every record. I mean, we have people, somebody said the other day that a social worker had said the house looked a bit messy and it had gone on the records. Then she admitted a week later that she'd got the wrong house. But that statement on the records magnified on the next 10 reviews until it was always there and became something bigger when it hadn't even been her house in the first place. And that real trust element has just gone. And I think what we're saying here, what you're saying here is it's relationships.
It's relationships.
And trust.
And trust.
And nobody has it anymore. We all live in fear of allegations. And also I think as well, social workers these days live in fear of the blame, of their jobs are not getting right. They're so strapped for time, funding, everything, and they haven't formed that relationship. I think when they do something wrong, it's very easy then to say, oh, it wasn't me, it was a foster carer, let's investigate them. And I know that's harsh, but it happens all the time, whistleblowing and allegations and stuff. And it seems like the Wild West out there at the moment. And I wonder how we can bring it back to, and I know in the care review, they're not looking at the relationship between social workers and foster carers. They're looking at the relationship between social workers and families, social work. There seems to be the be all and end all, the social workers of the answer to everything. Probably speaking out of turn here, but it may be because Josh McAllister founded Frontline, which is the government funds Frontline to fast track social workers. So, you can't but help come through with a certain kind of view on things. Foster carers really don't figure in this care review. I hope I'm wrong. Let's see if we are when the final report comes out in a few weeks. However, how can we, from my point of view, the only way we can get back to feeling that we can speak out for children, for ourselves, rely on supervision as being a two-way proper relationship, is actually foster carers getting some more of a status. We're not going to be given respect. We're not going to be handed that we're valued. We actually need to be safer and more protected in our role, I think, so that we then can relax and know we're protected. We've got all the things behind us. We've got a working status, and we can engage better with social workers. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I've been a social worker, Sarah, for 31 years, and I can sit here and tell you I have loved every day of my working life.
Wow.
Not many social workers can say that. You know, you've got agency staff coming and going. I mean, where that came from, I don't know, because there's so much money wasted. Instead of paying their social workers, and I think government have something to do with this, a proper recognised salary, and then it would attract a different type of person. It would attract the more experienced type of person.
Yeah.
You know, experienced managers. I've always been very fortunate. The managers I've had in social work have worked their way up from the bottom to a management position. But now, I mean, I've been asked on numerous occasions as an independent, you know, oh, if we pay you £60 an hour, will you come and manage this team?
Yeah.
No, I won't. I'm not that. I wouldn't want to be a manager. I'll tell you why, because I wouldn't altogether believe the people that were telling me what had happened. I would have to see it for myself.
Yes.
I would have to know. I'm not that
That's from years of being on the front line.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think, you know, it needs a root and branch. Absolutely, like the health service, because it worked at one time.
Yes. Yeah.
We didn't always do children in need.
No, it worked. I like that. It works at one time.
It worked at one time.
You know, there is a way that it can work at some level. And I think that it's the same with foster care. I think we've got an awful lot of work to do. I'm going to just end there. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, actually, put you on the spot, because time goes by so quickly. But would you come back at a later date as well, because we've got so much more that we want to chat to you about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's been so great having you on. And I think I think a lot of you will relate to what we're saying today, and it's lovely to hear it from Sandra's point of view, because it's nice to hear it from the other side, from a social worker that does support foster carers and fostering. And I know an awful lot of us are feeling that they're few and far between at the moment. Some of us do have fabulous social workers, and they are out there. There is no doubt about that at all. But I think as well, what we don't see is the other side, where actually in today's socio-economic climate, in today's sort of social climate, with more and more children coming into care, I know they want to keep a lot more children and families together, but there will always be need foster care, and it is rising. And I think that I've got a lot of food for thought today from you, Sandra. Thank you. And we're going to take that forward and see what we can do with it as well, working on a brighter future for us all and our children. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and actually I usually pre-warn guests so that they've got a quick idea of what they're going to say. And we like 1 word to 1 sentence, because every single question's got the propensity to know. So the first question is, would you recommend fostering to a friend?
Absolutely.
Oh, lovely. Absolutely. Number 2, this probably you won't be able to do on the spot. What do you think is the single most important thing that would improve things?
More training around foster carers for frontline workers, and if they move into a fostering team, really getting to know the fostering task and what they're there for.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. And number 3 is, why are you a social worker?
Why am I a social worker?
We usually ask, why do you foster, you see?
Right, so why am I a social
worker?
Right, I'll tell you why I'm a social worker. Many, 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 many years ago, I had to. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for those 2 lovely social workers. That's why I'm a social worker. To give something back.
You had, that's what a perfect way to end. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Well, that was a lovely conversation, everybody. And thank you for listening. Please press the subscribe button, because it really, really does make a difference. And we can get our followers up, get our voice out there. And hopefully we'll invite Sandra back very soon. If you've got any questions for Sandra from the social work point of view, email us at info@fosterwiki.com, and Sandra and I could even come on and do a questions and answers and questions, couldn't we, together, because we'd love to do that. So any questions at all, anything you'd like to know, inside information from the social worker's perspective, get back to us, and we'll see you very, very soon. Thanks for listening. Okay, bye.
Bye.